The watershed is I, Russian Moose, and welcome back to Let's Talk History. And today, we are going to be talking about, as Gunny said in Pan's Medals, the pinnacle of goddamn U.S. engineering, the M4 Sherman. And the more astute of you will notice this is not a Sherman, but we'll talk about that here in a second. Let's actually bring up the Sherman. That's not the Sherman I want. Okay, there we go. So, in case you did not know, the M4 Sherman, most produced battle tank ever. U.S. really like to spam the heck out of these things. So, it was built to upgrade the M3 Lee, which is this poopy thing. The M3 Lee was so bad that tankers actually called it the I think it was the 8-man coffin or something like that. I don't know. We'll see. I can't remember. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6-man coffin. That's what the Russians called it whenever we gave it to them in Lend-Lease. Because it was so bad against what the Germans had, which were the Panzer IIIs and 4s, which goes straight through the thing. And this tank had really no other way to deal with them except for this stupid sponsonly mounted 75 that's right here. But yes, so the M4 Sherman was a upgrade of the M3 Lee, to say. You can look at the holes, they look very similar, so there's that. It retained much of the, as I said, retained much of the same design as the Lee. My notes are falling, that's bad. It kept the 75mm gun, but it placed it into a fully traversing turret. I don't think it is the same gun, actually. No. The Lee has the M2 cannon, the Sherman has the M3 cannon. But put it onto a rotating turret on the top of the tank. And inside that turret, they had a 1-axis gyro stabilizer, which was vertically. It was a vertical stabilizer. So if you, I don't know, say you're moving and you're looking at a tank, and you're going over bumps and stuff, well, the gyro stabilizer will keep your gun somewhat on target, or vertically. They did not put a two-way gyro stabilizer, which would have also kept the turret on the fixation, not just the gun. Most people didn't really like that when they were developing it because they thought it was stupid, because why would you need a fire tank while you're moving? But some crew members liked it. Some of them didn't. It was really up for debate. It just really helped out with the tank crews for whenever they did stop and fire. The gun would be somewhat on target. And another thing that they really thought about when making the Sherman was mechanical reliability. These vehicles were very, very reliable, and not only that, but they're really easily produced. They're easy to maintain. They're durable when out in the field, so unlike the Panthers and the Tigers that the Germans were fielding when the later Shermans saw combat in Normandy, they would break down after like every day basically. Their engines would give out on them or something like that. But the Shermans did not. And if it did happen, then they were real easy to fix. So crews loved that. Standardization of parts and ammunition between all the variants was really good until, of course, the 76mm came along, and there's a few other differences here and there with engines and fuel and all that fun stuff, but we'll talk about that when those come. And whenever the Sherman was first put into service in, what year was it, 42, they outclassed the German vehicles that were in time, because the German vehicles of the time were still the Panzer IIIs and early Panzer IVs. So, yeah, they didn't really have fun, the Germans. So, the prototyping phase was actually put up by the U.S. Army Ordnance Department. And they were actually the ones that designed it, too. They did not license this out to any company, which is something I found surprising. If you look at most of the U.S. vehicles at the time, they were licensed out to companies, and well, mostly vehicles everywhere. They're licensed out to companies basically you had a contest, and whoever won got the design. And, well, the U.S. Army Ordnance designed this themselves, which, props to the government, I guess. So, and the medium tank M4, which is what it was designated, was supposed to replace the medium tank M3, which is the Lee. And the M3 Lee, in turn, was actually an update of the M2 medium, which never saw combat, and it was a piece of crap. Here, we'll pull up the M2 real quick, because it's actually in the game for some reason. Yeah, so the M3 Lee was an upgrade of this poopy thing. I don't know what we were thinking, but there's that. We loved our sponsons back in the day. So yeah, the M2 Medium of 1939 was actually also a development of the M2 Light Tank, which was put out in 1935. So basically, everything started with the poopy little M2, which you can see right here. This is a later variant of the M2. I do not want to test drive you. This thing. This thing started everything. So. So, as you saw on the Lee, it had a 37mm gun on like a tumor turret on the top, which gave it a really, really, really high profile. And they did not like that. And it had this stupid side mount sponson gun, which was really bad. You couldn't fire, I think it was like right past this angle right here, and you couldn't go out like that angle. So it was really bad. You had a really, really limited firing arc. So I don't even seriously know what we were thinking. So the Sherman's reliability was over many features developed from basically all of the tanks before it. The U.S. loved to make their tanks really reliable, which I can't blame them. It's a nice thing to have. Things that really made these vehicles reliable were the vertical volute spring suspension, the rubber bush tracks, the rear-mounted radial engines, and drive sprockets in the front. Up until I think it was the M4A2, the Shermans actually had radial engines. Or was it the M4? No, the M4 says it. So it was the M4A2. Up until the M4A2, which had a diesel engine, the Shermans used radial engines. So, I mean, what are you going to do? Sorry about that, people. Always seem to love to walk in while I'm recording. Just, yeah, that's why I need to record when nobody's home. Alright, so, as I was saying, up until the M4A2, Shermans had radial engines. In case you don't know what a radial engine, it is basically an aircraft engine. We were smart and were like, hey, let's put this aircraft engine in the back of our tank, because that makes sense. And the reason why the Shermans were so high, well, had a high profile, I should say, is because of that transmission. They had to design a way to get that transmission into the vehicle. So, if you look, it's actually not that bit small. Probably extends up to here, actually. So, that's a pretty big transmission. So when designing the M4, they wanted a fast, dependable medium tank to support infantry, and go through breakthrough tactics and defeat any tank that the Axis nations had, until, you know, the Tiger and the Panther came along. So they basically achieved that goal. The 75mm gun M3 was very good for doing its job. And the armor was very decent. 50 mils of sloping. 50 mils at a slope of whatever degree that is. It's really good. Sorry about that. So, as the prototype was deemed the T6, and it was, the first one was completed in September 2nd, 1941. Unlike later M4s, the hull was cast and had a side hatch. So as you can see here, this is still an M4A1. It still has a cast hull, but it does not have hatches on the side to load ammo. I do believe the M4A2 has those. Yes. These hatches on the side to load ammo. They used to be hatches. They're actually just welded on plates on the M4A2. Same with the M4. If you look there, they're basically just plates where they used to have hatches for ammo. Which is really dumb. I mean, it makes sense to load ammo from the side of the tank instead of having to go up top and then open up the hatches and do all that fun stuff, but hey, whatever. So as I said, the hatches were eliminated in production models, and the T6 is standardized as the M4 in production began in October of 41. So this vehicle is just getting out there pretty late into the overall war for everybody. For our war, it had just started, so it was pretty good. So, when it was first put into production, the Lima Locomotive Works got on it, which I don't know where they're located, but they basically, I guess, built trains before the war, seeing as how the locomotive works. And we actually didn't build them for ourselves. We built them for England, which really needed them in the African front in North Africa. So, after all that was done, the U.S. wanted to field 16 armored divisions and 70 independent tank battalions, but that didn't really work. Because prior to September 1942, FDR, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, had announced a production program going for 120,000 tanks for the Allied war effort. And, well, that would have created 61 armored divisions. That's a lot. And, well, they just couldn't do that because of all the materials required to make these vehicles, so they just really couldn't. Since Delano also wanted to up our Navy a lot, according to what my notes say, if they didn't build any new naval ships during the war, they could have built 67,000 tanks with all the steel used in it. And, only about 53,500 were produced between 42 and 43 because of all the shipping that was being made. So that's a lot. So, variants, quickly about variants, and their names and stuff like that, and why they get them. So, the, Army had 7 main sub-designations for the M4. It was the M4, M4A1, M4A2, M4A3, M4A4, A5, and A6. Did not, just because it says, oh, M4A4, it does not mean that it's better than the M4 in any way. So there was no linear improvement in these designations. It was just the Army being stupid as usual. It basically indicated standardized production variants. That's all that meant. It didn't mean like, oh, this is an upgrade. Like, the A1 actually came before the M4, so I don't really. I hate the way we name things sometimes here in the U.S. Most of the time, the subvariants just fielded different engines. That was really all they did, especially later, like the A3, A4, A5, and A6. And, of course, the A1 differed from everybody else because I had a fully cast upper hull. The M4A4 had a longer engine system that required a longer hull, and a longer suspension system, and more track blocks, and thus, most designating feature of the A4 is wider spacing between the bogies. Basically, it had one extra bogie on it. It was about this much longer. I think I have a picture of it that I might put into this video. So, the A5 was the administrative placeholder designation for the Canadians. In case you don't know, the US built tanks for everybody, basically. And, the A6 had been an elongated chassis and additional armor, but fewer than 100 of them were produced, so that's why you really don't hear about the A6 that much. Speaking of the A6, and I guess the A2, most Shermans ran on gas, but the A2 and the A6 had diesel engines. A pair of GMC 671 straight 6 engines were in the M4A2, and the A6 had a Caterpillar RD 1820 radial. Um, the A4, which used a Chrysler A57 multi-bank engine, were mostly supplied to other allied countries under Lend-Lease. Along with the A6 and the A2, especially to the Russians, since the Russians, all of their vehicles had diesel engines. We didn't want to give them a gasoline engine, because then that would screw up their entire supply chain, so we gave them the A2s, which had, as I said, diesel engines. Sorry about that, I actually just woke up. You probably hear my voice. M4 can refer specifically to the initial subtype with its Continental radial engine, or the R975, or the entire family of the 7 Shermans, just really depending on the context. And also refer to a small arms used by the U.S. military. So, as things are being improved, things are added to the end of the name of the vehicle's name. So, like HVSS chassis shows that has the new HVSS chassis. A W in parentheses in the name shows that has a white ammunition stowage. And things such as the M4 composite had stronger armor arrangements. So, you just basically, we are very simple here in the U.S. So, if you see composite armor Sherman or Sherman composite, that means that has different armor on it. Pretty simple, right? So, just a little footnote, in case you're wondering, a 24-volt electrical system was used in all M4s, so there's always that. Why did I... Okay, I don't need that. As seen here, early Shermans mounted a medium velocity 75mm cannon, which was loved by crews. Crews loved this gun. Most of the U.S. crews would actually opt to have the 75mm gun over the 76mm gun, which was later installed on vehicles, just because of its versatility in combat. It's funny. The U.S. always, whenever they get something new, they instantly start working on its replacement. And, the Army Ordnance actually started working on the T-20 as a replacement as the Sherman was getting out there. And the Army decided to not really stop it, but they didn't work on it that much. And as they were working on it, they actually put things that they were going to put in the T-20 in the Sherman, which is really funny. So, later on in the war, the M4A1, A2, and A3 models received the T-23 turret, which we're going to show right now. They received this new T-23 turret, which allowed the mounting of the high-velocity 76mm M1 cannon, as seen here. They couldn't really fire that many. Well, they could fire as many HE shells, but they weren't as effective. In case you don't know how HE works, or how longer barrels work, I should say. Shorter your barrel, lower your muzzle velocity, which lower your muzzle velocity, the better you are for HE. You can put more explosives in it, basically. And another thing that they noticed was, since this 76mm gun had a higher velocity than the 75mm gun, they were firing HE, and the HE would sometimes just dig into the ground before it went off, and that's not good. That would muffle most of the explosion. So basically, the tankers had to fire at solid objects whenever they were firing HE at infantry or light positions. That's why they preferred the 75mm gun over the 76, because later in the war there weren't that many German tanks that they had to kill by themselves. So they didn't really have to worry about anything. Another thing was, the M4 and M4A3 were sometimes produced with 105mm guns, which we're going to pull up real quick. This is the A3 with the the 105 on it. It was first put into service in 1944. Same with the 76mm gun on the M4A1. also put into service in January 1944, and the 105 was put into service in February of 44. So late war, these new vehicles started showing up on the fronts, which is kind of surprising. I really thought that they were put in much earlier, but they really aren't. So another variant was the M4A3E2 Jumbo. In June or July of 44, the Army accepted a limited run of 254 Sherman Jumbos, and they had a really, really thick armor that was more sloped than other vehicles, other Shermans. So it gave it even more armor. There's the armor values in case you're wondering. I love this skin. It's great. Some Sherman Jumbos were replaced with the 76mm gun. Some kept the 75. It was just really what they had laying around at the time. Or what they were building at the time. Because these Sherman Jumbos were actually modifications in the factory. They weren't specifically built to be like this, so. They really just built these for assault tanks, so it'd go up against pillboxes and stuff with them. Fire HE into them and all that fun stuff. So the M4A3 is the first one to have the HVSS chassis, or the horizontal volute spring suspension, which we're going to show off here really quick. It allowed for wider tracks, and it would easily distribute more weight, because that's what tracks do. If they're wider, they distribute weight more off, better, stuff like that. So crews like the HVSS chassis gave them a smoother ride and stuff like that. So the EZ8, or the E8 as shown right here, was actually an experiment. The Americans didn't really know what to think of it, so they just sat down there like, hey, what do you guys think about this? And crews loved it, so they loved it so much they gave it the nickname EZ8, so that's where it got its name from. The US and England loved to put weird things on these vehicles. Like there were bulldozer ones for Sherman dozer tanks, which you could go through things with those. There were duplex drives for amphibious Shermans. Look up a picture of these; they're really stupid looking. The duplex drive ones. I think they're just called Sherman duplexes. Look them up; they're really stupid. They had an R3 flamethrower for the Zippos, and at the T-34 60-tube Calliope 4.5-inch rockets, which we can show because for some reason Gaijin thought it was a good idea to put this in game, but a rocket launching Sherman. So that's what we all need, right? Those were all just US variants. The English had the mine flail versions and the DD versions and stuff like that. And they were known as Hobart's funnies, because Percy Hobart really liked the idea of doing this to Shermans. He was the commander of the 79th Armored Division. Now we get on to my favorite vehicles. 50,000 Sherman tanks, plus thousands more derivative vehicles under different model numbers, of course. These include the M10 Wolverine, or the 17-pounder self-propelled Achilles in English service, the M36 destroyers, or tank destroyer, the M7B1, the M12, the M40, and the M43 self-propelled artillery, the M32 and M74 tow truck style recovery vehicles with winches and stuff on them, and an 81mm mortar for smoke screens, and the M34 from the M32B1, which it was derived, and the M35 from the M10A1, which it was derived as artillery movers. So In case you don't know, my favorite vehicle of all time has got to be the M10 Wolverine. I just love the way this vehicle looks. What it did in the war. It's great. So, um, so the M4 Sherman had a total of 6,784 built between July 42 and January 44. The M4 105s, just the standard M4 105s, had 800 built from February 44 to March of 45. The M4A1 had 6,281 built from February 42 to December 43. The M4A176 wet rack had 3,246 built from January 44 to July of 45. The M4A2 had 8,053 built between April of 42 and May of 44. The A276W had 2,915 built between April 1944 and May 1945. The A3 had 1,690 built between June of 42 and September 43. Oh, a lot of those built. Wow. The A3 105 had 500 built between the May of 44 and June of 45. A375W, which I did not know existed, by the way, had 3,071 built between the February 44 and March of 45. The A376 white rack had 9,924 built. That's a lot of tanks. Between March of 44 and April of 45. So basically, in a year, they had built over, well, almost 10,000 vehicles. Way to go, America. There were only 254 jumbos built between June of 44 and July of 44. Just a month, they built almost 300 vehicles, and so that's a lot of vehicles. So the Easy 8 with the 76mm on it, 3,142 were built in just August of 44. That was a lot of vehicles. Damn. Come on, America. Jeez. And the Easy 8 with 105mm cannon on it, 2,539 were built in just September of 44. What were we doing? Dear God, we were building these things like it was nothing. The A4, 7,499. So 7,500 were built between July of 42 and November of 43. So almost a year and a half. That's a lot of vehicles. And the A6, 75 were built between the October of 43 and February of 44. I'm guessing those were kind of like the footnote vehicles. So, on to some service history. So approximately 20,000 Shermans were issued to the U.S. Army, about 1,100 to the Marine Corps. The U.S. also supplied 18,000 to England, some which then went to the Free Poles and the Canadians, and the Soviet Union received about 4,100 of them, and about 812 were transferred to China. In case you don't know, we liked China a lot back then. If you want to read up for some really cool history, read up the Flying Tigers. They're pretty interesting to read about. So, like the Russians, the Marine Corps loved the diesel M42s and the gasoline-powered A3s because of their wider tracks. Chief of the Army's Armored Force, their Lieutenant General Jacob Devers, ordered no diesel engine Sherman to be used by the Army outside of the Zone of Interior. Which, in case you don't know, the Zone of Interior is the continental U.S. And the Army used all types for either training and stuff like that. They had intended the M4A2s and the A4s to be primarily Lend-Lease exports, but as I said, the Marine Corps loved the A2s, so they used those. Shermans were being issued in small amounts to units on the West Desert Campaign, just so that they can get familiarized with the vehicles. Infantry could get used to seeing them, tankers can get used to driving them, stuff like that. Also, they're really sent out there as an experiment, so that was just after the Axis had taken to Brook. And So instead of actually sending the Shermans directly to Patton as he was moving his way to the English, they decided it would probably be better just to send the Shermans straight to the English, and almost 300 M4A1s and some M4A2s were sent straight to them in September of 1942 to help them defend Tobruk and the Suez Canal and all that fun stuff over there. These Shermans were modified for desert warfare. They had sand shields over the tracks and other like water stowage and stuff like that on them. The Sherman first saw combat in the Second Battle of El Alamein in October 42 with the English 8th Army. The offensive there was 252 tanks fit for action. They equipped the 9th Armored Brigade with New Zealand Division, the 2nd Armored Brigade, the 1st Armored Division, the 8th and 20th Armored Brigades, the 10th Armored Division. That was really it for Sherman's. That's 352, I believe. Just over 300. 252, sorry. They were up against, as I said, Panzer 3s and 4s, with their long 50s and short 75s, engaging them at almost 2,000 yards, or 1,800 meters. In case you're wondering, both sides lost vehicles. So, I just want to know what vehicle went through the front of a Sherman at almost 2 kilometers. That's really, really surprising. Maybe I got a side shot or something, I don't know. So the first U.S. Shermans to be used were M4A1s in Operation Torch, the next month. So, December. So, on the 6th of December near Tiborba, a platoon attached to the 2nd Battalion, 13th Armored Regiment was lost to enemy tanks and anti-tank guns. So basically, they were stupid, went out there and got themselves killed. So over time, the M4s and M4A1s replaced the M3s and U.S. tank battalions over the North African campaign, because M3s were shit. M4 and M4A1 were the main types of U.S. units until late of 44 when the 76mm guns started going around. The Army then had started replacing them with the A3 model with a more powerful 500 horsepower engine and the 76mm gun. Though some M4s and M4A1s were still in use until the end of the war because crews loved them that much. The first Sherman to enter combat with the 76mm gun in July of 44 was an M4A1. It was closely followed by the A3 with the 76 on it. And by the end of the war, half of the U.S. Army Shermans in Europe had the 76mm gun. The first HUSS chassis to see combat was the Easygate 76 Wet Rack in December of 44. So in the Pacific, armor on both sides operated in jungle terrain, and it was really crappy for tanks, in case you're wondering. Soft ground and heavy vehicles don't really get along that well. So, both sides there, aka the Japanese and us, figured out that light tanks were probably going to be better than heavy Shermans. So we stuck with them most of the time. Sorry about that. It's allergy season here. So by 1943, the Imperial Japanese Army were still using the Type 95 and Type 97 Chihas, which were pretty poopy. And we were putting into service the M4s, the 75mm guns, and those tanks I think had either 50 mils or 37mm guns, so they weren't going to do much. So the Chinese in India also received 100 Shermans, used them really well in 43 and 44. During the latter years of the war, high explosive ammunition was preferred in the Pacific because the AP rounds that were given to the Shermans often just went straight through the armor of the Type 95 Hagos, which they were fighting most of the time. So they'd just fire HE at the thing and just get it over with instead of firing multiple shells straight through the vehicle. So, The high-velocity guns in the tank destroyer center over there were used for penetrating fortifications, but most of the time they actually just used M4s with flamethrowers and just burnt them out, which I'm so happy flamethrowers are banned from war. That was a horrible, horrible way to go. In case you did not know, they would fire the flamethrower into the top of the trench, which would burn everybody in the top of the, well, not the trench, the bunker. It would burn everybody in the top of the bunker. And everybody that was down in the tunnels and stuff, since there was so much fire up top, it would just suck all the oxygen out, and people down below would just suffocate, and it was a horrible way to go. So post-World War II, the U.S. kept Easy-8s in service forever. Same with the M4s with the howitzers on them, the 105s. Since they were like the most advanced type of Sherman, they were used in the Korean War, and then after that they were phased out by the Pattons. In the Korean War, it fought alongside the early M46 Pattons and the M26 Pershing, and the Easy-8 and the T-34-85, which it was fighting in Korea, were very comparable. Could destroy each other when hit. Though the HVAP or the high-velocity armor-piercing shells, advanced optics, and better crew training gave the Shermans an advantage. I don't think the Soviets really used APCR when using the T-34-85, so why would the North Koreans and Chinese use it, huh? So, the Easy-8, using the 76mm HVAP ammo, destroyed a total of 41 tanks in July to November of 1950. Doesn't sound like a lot, but if you think about Korea, it's really hilly terrain, long stretches, and stuff like that. Throughout the conflict, the Easy-8s were actually preferred over the more advanced M26s just because of their ease of maintenance. And it was easier to drive, and they just had better rides and all that fun stuff, so they preferred it. The US Army replaced them with M46 Pattons, which were an improved M26 Pershing during the 50s, though we still continue to give our leftover Shermans to allies, like the Israelis and the French and stuff like that. Speaking of the Israelis use these things so well, when they were fighting. So, the Israeli army imported, M4A1s during the 1956 Suez Crisis. About 300 of them were upgraded with the long, high-velocity 75mm gun CN-7550 of the AMX-13, and were designated Sherman M50, or Super Shermans, by the Israelis. Before the Six-Day War in 1967, the Israeli army was still using Shermans. They upgraded about 108 M4A3 HVSS Shermans to the French 105mm Model F1 gun. Re-engine it with the Cummins engines. Cummins? Want a Cummins strip? Oh, sorry, it's just a redneck joke. It designated the upgraded Sherman M51, aka Super Sherman, or the I Sherman. The Sherman tanks fighting alongside the 105mm Centurions and M48 Pattons were able to defeat most of the T-34-85s, T-54s, 55s, 62 series, and IS-3s used by the Egyptian Syrian forces in the Six-Day War. That's pretty good if you're able to kill a IS-3 with a Sherman. But yet again, it didn't have a 105mm gun, so whatever. If you look up... Sorry about that, like I said, I just woke up. If you look at the 105mm Super Shermans, they look really cool. Let me just get through some more notes here. Why do I not have anything on these? Because it's boring like gun development crap. As I said, it was the first widely produced tank that had a gyroscopic stabilizer on it. As I said, it was only vertically. The stabilizer would put the gun within 1/8 of a degree at 50 miles an hour, and which increased the hit probability by about 70%. That's really good. Another thing that the Shermans have used effectively, which sounds really, really scary if you know what a canister round is, they fired canister rounds out of these 75mm guns. If you don't know what a canister is, it's a giant shotgun, basically. Um, we still use them today in the Abrams and stuff like that. They're just very scary. Another shell that was very scary was white phosphorus, which was intentionally used to smoke an artillery marker. But crews would actually fire it at tigers and panthers, because the burning white phosphorus would adhere to the tanks, and their excellent optics, quote unquote, being sarcastic about that, would be blinded by the smoke, and it would get sucked inside the vehicle and make it difficult or impossible for the crew to actually breathe. And they also fired the Willie Pete, or the white phosphorus rounds, at infantry. The pieces of it that would fly off and stick to you and burn, yeah, that's basically what it did. It would burn straight through you. It was very scary. So the 105mm gun also employed heat ammo, just in case. Didn't really use it that much because we didn't like heat. So that's a little footnote there on the ammo types, I guess. So the steel frontal, we're moving on to armor now. The steel frontal turret armor, the M4 range from 64 to 76mm, or 2.5 to 2.99 inches. The gun mantlet was protected by 76mm, or 2.99 inches of armor, sloped at 30 degrees. The turret side armor was 50mm, or 1.97 inches, at 5 degrees. And the rear was 64mm, or 2.52 inches at 90 degrees. The turret roof was 25mm thick, or 0.98 inches thick. The frontal hull armor was 51mm thick, which does not sound like a lot, but it was angled at 56 degrees, so that's something to look out for. The lower half of the hull was curved, so it just varied in thicknesses. So the hull sides were 38 to 45mm thick, or 1.5 to 1.77 inches thick, and just straight vertical. The whole rear was protected by an offset from the rear radiator, was 38mm thick, and the whole roof was 25mm thick. The T-23 turret, which was put on the 76mm tanks, actually upped the armor, and later tanks had upped hull armor. The hull armor is now 64mm thick, or 2.52 inches, and sloped at 47 degrees from the vertical. Or in the case of the M4A1 76W, it's curved from 37 to 55 degrees, so this making it more effective armor. The lower hull was 51 to 108mm thick on the vehicle, so sloped from 56 to 0 degrees. The turret was 64mm thick, sitting at 40 to 45 degrees on the vertical. The frontal turret was further protected by an unsloped 89mm gun mantlet, or 3.5 inches gun mantlet. The turret sides were 64mm, ranging from 0 to 13 degrees, and the turret rear was unsloped yet again. The jumbos had a 102mm thick frontal plate, or 4-inch thick, angled at 47 degrees, which gave it an effective thickness of 150mm, which, or 4.9 inches. That's a lot of, that's more than a Tiger, by the way. At some points it would actually be 180mm thick, which is very scary. Oh, what else do we have to talk about? Well, that ends this podcast. Well, not really a podcast, is it? Oh, never mind. We have to talk about all of the variants, because there were so many of them. So the US variants had the 3-inch gun motor carriage M10, or the Wolverine, as seen right here. We had the 90mm gun motor carriage, or the M36 Jackson, as seen right here. Very cool looking machine. We had the 105mm howitzer motor carriage N7B1 Priest, the 155mm gun motor carriage M12 SPG, the 155, 203, and 250mm motor carriages, the Sexton 88mm 25-pounder, the Flame Tank Sherman or the M4A3R3 Zippo or the M4 Crocodile. We had the T-34 Calliope and the T-40 Whiz-Bang, and a few other rocket Shermans. The Amphibious Duplex Drive, or DD Shermans, which was an English design used by the US. Engineering tanks, such as the D8, the M1, the M1A1 dozers, the M4 Duzit mobile assault bridge, and the T1E3 Aunt Jemima mine roller, and other mine clears, such as the flail that the English used. We had the M32 and M74 tank recovery vehicles, and the M34 and the M35 prime movers, which are basically tractors. The Sherman was extensively supplied through and leased to England, Soviet Union, Free France, other places like China. English received about 18,000 of them. Soviet Union received about 4,000. Free French taking about 657. They were the third, most receiver. And 57 were sent to other nations. So, that's really cool, I guess. So, that really rounds up the M4 Sherman, so I'd like to thank you all very much for watching. Stay safe out there, don't get shot in the face, and I'll see you next time.